is we've got Pimp here, obviously former pro, blah, 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 doing all the events and stuff nowadays. Actually, what's mad is nowadays is if you think of the people left in the analyst scene, because everyone forgets Sponge is technically a caster now. Like, he's not really supposed to be an analyst. And Yanko technically came back from being a coach, so I feel like he hasn't fully sort of like got his, his prime back, etc. And Kassad's a newbie at doing it. So you're actually one of the most veteran analysts we've got now, Pimp, which, it was only a few years ago you were just starting out, wasn't it?
It's crazy. I'm 25. I don't feel like I'm a veteran, but you're right. I started out like 4 years ago, maybe. My first event at DreamHack. Yeah.
And we've also got dusT too, not the brilliant map that everyone loves. Yeah, whatever, dusT. Like, people, there's the thing, because that's such an obvious whack angle to go with. Usually people can't do the joke well, like I can sort of weave it in there. Obviously not doing events just because, listen, that's just unfortunately what happens.
This is the pinnacle of my CS gig here, is this show. Okay. So, like, that
all right,
is where I'm at.
Bring your rig in then. Okay, let's make it good. I've actually got a quick question for you, Pimp, right? On one of my other shows, the one I do with Maui Snake, they brought up that, like, stupid comedy topic that I know, like, people like Semphis always thinks funny, and you do understand why Semphis think it's funny when I explain the premise. The premise that it's kind of true, even though it's a bit evil, that a lot of people who were, like, overweight in the beginning when they were pros, when they lose weight, they're not good anymore. Now, here's the thing, right? People are going to say, they had a caveat. They actually had a caveat, though. The caveat is, it doesn't count if you weren't like really overweight, and also if you're like similarly good. Like, I'll give you an example. Coldzera and Nico did lose weight, but they were pretty much like just as good. Like, it was like the next year they were pretty much like still just like the best player. It's not like they went from like best to like, I don't know, 15th or something. But there have been a lot of players where, harsh as it sounds, sometimes when they get their shit together, they actually just like become half as good, right? At the risk of sounding BM, Pip, you think it happened to you?
Yeah, a little bit, to be completely honest. I think it decreases over time, right? To be completely honest with you, I think when you get a life outside of Counter-Strike, that's when it starts to get dangerous. When I was fat, when I was playing Counter-Strike 10 hours a day, 12 hours a day. The only thing that mattered to me was wake up, eat, go to school if I had to, and then play Counter-Strike. So as soon as I started to lose weight, I got outside of gaming interests as well. I wanted to be with my friends. I wanted to play football. I wanted to go to parties. And while I still, I think to this day, I was still a decent pro, and I still kept my pro career, at a somewhat serious level. I know I played less Counter-Strike than I used to before. So I think over time, your level will decrease unless you find a way to balance that lifestyle. And there's like, people don't want to say it, but there's definitely something to the fact that if you go from being a fat fuck who don't have a life to a mediocre guy who then gets a life outside of gaming, you will most likely decrease in level over time. Maybe not the first year, but look at the player from year 1 to year 3. There'll be a significant decrease because the player stopped playing as much Counter-Strike he used to.
Sure. It even applies to talent. Like, obviously, Anders is just rubbish now. He's washed up. Machine used to be a great host. Now he's just a caster, lowly caster, whatever, with those obviously jokes, right? Let's get into the actual Counter-Strike then, boys. We've got an hour or so we'll get through some of this, right? I thought one thing we could do is, I know other people have done the whole, like, tried to do the Rostermania and stuff, but I always think part of the interesting thing about roster moves is you don't just do, like, this player for that player, that. Like, you think of things like, what does this imply about the team? What's the future of the squad? Like, would you want this roster move to happen? I think there's lots of angles you can always come up with. So what I thought we'd do is, obviously recently we had a bunch of, like, air quotes leaks, where we don't actually know if they're leaks, because technically if you're just a pleb, you have no way to verify that. For all you know, half are correct, you don't know which half, one's correct, none's correct. You can never know with these things. That's basically the reason why usually you wait for, like, the trusted journalists or sources or websites to do the reporting, because then the idea is, if they're wrong, there's a consequence. Like, people will question them next time, or people will say, or a player might call them out, etc. No one can really call out an anonymous account. Like, it's just an anonymous account. So with that said, I had heard a couple of these were at least, like, on the table or being thought of, or in certain cases, like, basically both parties want to do it, it just hasn't happened yet. So I'll also get into some of that as we go through some of them that it's, like, appropriate to. But obviously the most interesting ones, Pimp, if we start with, is the Astralis moves, because as far as it sounds from the outside, sounds like basically there's a term we have in English, it's called, like, diaspora. It means when like a people just spread out from, like, a homeland or whatever, and they just go to all the different countries of the world. Like, famously the Jewish people obviously did it in history, right? When this looks like that from the leaks, it just looks like that's what's happening to Astralis. Like, a whole bunch of devices already gone. I mean, it's not in these leaks, but months and months ago, I had heard that some of the big orgs like G2 obviously were interested in people like Glaive. I mean, he is one of the best IGLs ever. He isn't in these leaks, I will note. the ones that were in the leaks, let's go through some and we'll do them one by one. So one of the first ones, and for me, this one was completely out of left field in the sense that, like, I don't think fans would expect it. And the team that you would go into is really weird. It's the Magisk one, right? Which is the idea that Magisk would go and join Complexity. And then the secondary detail, even though this was in there, this wasn't really explained because, again, it just says the leak. You know, they don't really give you the context of why we're going to talk about it here. The implication was, and from behind the scenes, that he replaces Rush, which that's probably the part that also was out of left field for me because it's not really a role-for-role swap at all there. So what are your initial thoughts? Obviously, this is hypothetical. We are not confirming the leaks in any way. We're just saying if it did happen, this is what we think. So what would you think of a move like that if Magisk left Astralis and he went specifically to Call, and then if you want to do that extra as well, if you want to and specifically for Rush, pick which one of those you like first.
Yeah, I think depends on the angle, right? Because I think specifically for Complexity, I do think it makes sense. I do think getting a talent like Magisk into a lineup, it doesn't really matter whether or not you're changing him role by role with Rush. If you can get a talent like Magisk, if you can attract him to a lineup, you need to get him in. Also, I do think Counter-Strike these days, especially lately, with the way that you play, you don't need as much as a supportive element like Rush has been known to be for Complexity. So you can work around it. You know, you can have Blame F maybe do more of that role. You can have another player, you know, take on more of that kind of role. I think Magic's even in Astralis is having a more supportive element role sometimes within the way he plays. So I think had you told me this 2 years ago, it wouldn't make any sense to me. I think with the current circumstances and the current meta in Counter-Strike, you can make it work. And I think the thing that puzzles me and where I will agree with you partly is that I feel Magisk is a better player. I don't think Complexity is a team that I consider to be a team that can fight to be within the top 5 or within the top 6, even with Magisk on the lineup. So I'm thinking from his point of view, why would you want to go from Astralis to Complexity? Given I know you believe in yourself, given I know that you think you're a good player still, it's just I don't think that's as a step up or even an interesting project for him. So if I'm Complexity, I'm all happy. If I'm Blame It, if I'm Config, I'm all happy. But if I'm Magisk, are you really happy with that? Is it is it the salary? Is it the contract? What's attractive in it for you? That's what I'm thinking.
What do you think, dusT?
Yeah, I can't speak to like the personal angle of Magisk, like what Pimp was referring to there at the very end. But what I can say, if you're just looking at it from like a third party perspective, it's a match made in heaven. I think even if you say that it's not role for Rush, I think they have throughout their careers, particularly after Rush went to Cloud9, they have both always kind of been like that solo guy on the T side usually, right? Like just kind of maybe like a more aggressor, but definitely a guy who kind of plays solo roles. Not like a primary lurk like a Zipix or something like that, but definitely a solo guy. But they both can contribute in opening duels, right? Magisk's opening duel attempts is actually kind of high. It's only just a couple of percentage points below Dupreeh. So he definitely has an ability to be aggressor on the perimeter of the map, which is something that they use Rush for in Complexity, as well as a trade fragger for executes when Blame F wants to be like more of the like kind of lurk out in the late round. So I actually think role for role, it's not as apart as you might think when you just kind of look at how much they go for opening attempts. And yeah, I think that Magisk would add to the firepower of that team significantly. I mean, right now you have Blame F and Config who seem to be playing at a very, very high level. And it is true that Poison's kind of fallen off a bit on the op. Rush has obviously had his struggles. JKS never really lit the world on fire like people thought he would when he first joined the team and still hasn't to this day. So they definitely are in desperate need of another contributor to that team. And, if you have Config that's going to be like your brunt force, entry fragger, I think Magisk is the perfect guy to kind of be that hybrid player who can sometimes create openings himself, when he's alone on a default, but also can be more of a support factor when need be to kind of even out Config. So I think objectively it makes a perfect amount of sense for Complexity. Now, as far as Magisk as a player, could he get on a better team than Cole? I don't know. Like, it depends on what else is available out there. I don't know where else he would fit in right now in the current landscape. But I think it would make Complexity instantly way better, way more interesting.
Yeah, there's a lot of angles, obviously, that we can go on this, especially as another thing fans won't know is they won't necessarily know the setup of the scene. Like, I'll give you an example. If this was last year before Heroic was sold, I would tell you, well, the reason why he's not going to a Danish team, dusT, is no one could fucking afford him. Like, you're not going to go to Heroic and get like 10k if you could get... I mean, listen, if it's Complexity, let's be real, that could probably be 30, 40k. You could maybe be even higher if they want to break the bank, if they think you're the piece that's missing, Like, in fact, I'll even say one thing about Complexity I don't actually personally like is... even though I love the fact Jason Lake is like so involved and he will directly like use his like actual persona to sign people and sort of be like a sports owner in that sense, like he did fly to these people and build the case for them, and it gives you the sense of like, oh, this guy isn't just going to bring me in and out. Yeah, but the problem is though, if you actually want to be in the best team in the world, you kind of do want the guy to run it like Football Manager. You do want him to be like, listen, I like you, but I'm sorry, this is a very harsh cut, but it has to happen because, I mean, people don't realise we were talking about Na'Vi this way when Na'Vi was number 2 in the world because the premise was they had the pieces to be number 1, so you have to kind of be a bit ruthless. And so that's one thing I'm a bit concerned about. I could totally believe on this complexity side, listen, this is a very good potential move for them. I don't know how many big name players they can attract at this point in time, just because of the level of the team, basically. You know, not necessarily, like, they've got some good players, but, and also I do think, if I look at the team, I heard rumours months ago they were trying to get Blame F and Config to come to Astralis to go the other way. Well, I'll tell you what, this basically seals the deal that like obviously those players are staying, and by the way, that's probably even a great way for you just like to get them to stay. So, right, I'll tell you what, I'll go get you like literally a major winner from your country, probably a player you've wanted to play with. Config obviously has played with in the past, and it was straight fire when they did. That's even an angle people are probably going to miss. I'm so glad that's happening again, that those two players are playing again, because I remember when they came up in Dig, I was like, mate, this is going to be criminal if they don't become like the next Device and Dupreeh. Like, you've got two amazing players, no role overlap, just like Device and Dupreeh. And you could literally, like, those are the kinds of players I used to tell. Same with Twists and Liege. I always told those players privately, like, mate, when you find a player like that, you just stick with them as long as they're good. Like, unless they really go to shit, like, there's not many players you're going to get that are going to be as good as a teammate. So if you want to be a champion, like, you find a way to get into teams together or to stay in the team together, or don't, like, sort of be traitors and cut each other and blah, blah, blah. Sadly, the way the North project went, like, they didn't really do it. They just everyone got cut one by one, didn't they? It was kind of just a bizarre way to break up. So it's kind of cool that all these years later they reunite, you know, by a very circuitous route. The problem I have is when I actually analyse the move. Like, I totally agree with both of you. Listen, Magisk is actually quite a cerebral player in the modern day. He already was like an individually smart player, but I have to say, he impressed me with this IGL period. Like, look how many fucking tournaments he won. This was actually legit. And that the story a lot of people forget is that the last Pro League they won, that one at the end of that year where they got Glaive back, but who was it? Zipnix hadn't come back yet, or maybe he came back at the very end or something. That one, people forget this. Glaive even said himself, oh, I didn't start calling on that one either. Like, I let Magisk still do it, and then afterwards is when I took over again. Well, they did still win that tournament. Like, that's legit as fuck. So I have to say, like, I'm sure he has got a different vision on the game from the guy I remember as just like, you know, like a monster lurk player or whatever, like, used to be back in the day as a youngster. But the only issue I have is this. That's like also a product of, like, you had to do that in the team. It's not like you chose. It's not like you said, right, like, my dream is to be an in-game leader. You did it because Glaive had to go, right? And someone had to do it. And by the way, props for doing it. But I also do worry. I want to know, am I ever going to see Magisk a superstar again? Because that's why the role for role thing worries me. Because I have to say, if we were going role for role, the obvious move is, this is the end of JKS's career. See you, mate. You can go back to fucking Australia. I'll be bringing in a way better version of you, prime, if I could get him, prime Magisk from like 2 or 3 years ago. That would be where Cole could like instantly be a contender or something like me. If they had him, Config and Blame, and they're all in roles that make sense, they're sort of prime peak, you'd have a lot of firepower there. I don't feel at the moment, though, that's what Magisk has been, because I mean, he's been kind of the guy who dropped off a lot, it felt like.
Yeah, and that's what I feel with this move, right? Because I agree with you, but I think when you look at it, the only potential loser in this move would be Magisk himself. Because I agree, like, from complexity point of view, it's good. I think the fact that he can come in and potentially help Blame F with being the in-game leader as well, and I think people underrate severely when you can go from a team like Astralis, even if you're not the in-game leader. Let's say Zipnix is going somewhere else, and we'll probably discuss that later. But just being a player on a team that works so well and has so much insight on how to play Counter-Strike in the current meta, in the old meta, you can bring so much information into your new team. So just having that as an attribute is great for complexity. But what does that help Magisk? Like, he comes into what I think is it a broken team? No, but it's a team that has been stagnating for 12 months now. Like, I haven't seen any improvements whatsoever for Blame F as an in-game leader. I like the guy. I think he's an incredible skilled individual player, but as an in-game leader, I don't think he's better than Magisk for that matter, right? I think Magisk could come into complexity, potentially be a better in-game leader than Blame F. So what does that actually do for Magisk?
Yeah, that's such an interesting angle.
Yeah, that's the thing, right? So if you're Magisk in this case, sure, it's a new channel, and sure, I guess the contract would be very lucrative if you go to complexity. But from the point of view that, what are you actually getting into, right? If you're Magisk right now, is that really a good move for him? I'm not too sure about it. Whereas if you're complexity, if you're Blame F, if you're config, it's all good, because as you said, you get a much, much better version than JKS potentially if he comes back to his prime.
Yeah,
That's also the other thing I have to say, though, is like, if you obviously the other move Cole just did is they did just fire their coach. So, like, that in itself almost makes me wonder if they actually understand what you're saying there, Pimp. Because I agree. The problem with Blame F is this. Obviously, the stats are unbelievable. Like, individually, he's ridiculous in the game leader. The problem is, if you're going to be a great in-game leader, let me see the T-sides, let me see the games you win, let me see the placings. You know, unfortunately, this is what we judge the in-game leaders by. And in that area, he's just all right. You know, it wasn't terrible. So I will say one area that a lot of in-game leaders underestimate, or rather when they think they're good, they just want to do it all themselves. You can ask my boy Carrigan about this, is they tend to be like, look, don't give me a coach who's going to have like mad input or try and run the system. You know, like, let me do it mainly and then give me a guy who's kind of like he works with me. You know, I tell him to watch these demos or he gives me his input. I got the feeling that was more like what their relationship was like, you know. So I wonder actually what they're going to do on the coach angle. Like if they're going to get some big name in that sense, maybe there's someone who comes over in that regard. Obviously, by the way, we'll go to it in a minute. Zonic's potentially on the table. If Zonic wants to cash out, if he wants to get a nice payday, that's potentially available. Remember, with these players they've got now, they're not actually an NA team. They're an NA org, but they're going to be a European team. Obviously, if everyone lives in Denmark, well, if you're Zonic, you just live at home. What do you think on that? We'll transition to that topic, actually. I know it's not technically the players, but it was actually announced today, basically, from a legit source, based on what I heard, that Zonic basically will leave Astralis now. That's not, no one knows where he's going, as I've just said, but he will leave as a coach, which even though it was actually reported, you know, it could happen, like I think a week ago or something by HLTV.org, if that was who the original source was. That was actually a out of left field move too. Like I speculated from things I'd heard. I didn't think he was happy for like, I'm going to say like the last year or so, even a bit longer. I'd basically heard he was one of the people who didn't necessarily fuck with like the Kasmith wave. Because if people don't know, the problem I've heard from the Danish scene, I'm even talking the sports scene, mate. I've had people reach out to me out even in Counter-Strike. They just heard about the situation. They basically said, that guy is like the definition of a sports boomer. You know, he thinks like sports is like, it's like a physical thing. Like, right, I'm going to get in the gym, give me 20. It's like, you know, got to work. Oh, you guys want to quit early? You want a week off? That's not what a fucking champion does. And the problem was he took that mentality and he brought it to what was already a team that could barely win any more than it did. And they were burned out to fuck. So I heard, unfortunately, a lot of the players got put off. What people don't know, though, is the reason it took this long is because in the meantime, they re-upped with insane contracts that were like mega bucks money. And so at the time they thought, whatever, we'll put up this for now. Maybe we can get the breaks like a couple of them did. Obviously, they got to enjoy the money. In fact, it turned out because we were online, they got to sort of enjoy the money, not even with the normal sort of travel lag that you have where you have to be wrecked going around the world. So what do you think about this, Pimp? Obviously, it's pretty crazy. Just thinking of Zonic not in Astralis, just that move doesn't seem right. The players, you know, obviously the team's had its issues, but the idea of Zonic not, and the idea that he goes to another team, it's hard, it's crazy to even imagine, right?
It is crazy to imagine, and I think that will be, you know, that will be the signal of the death of Astralis in that sense, or at least the Astralis we know it in Denmark, right? Of course, it's connected to whatever else is going on within Astralis. We'll probably talk about the rumors with Glaive and what's going to happen with the rest of the players, right? But I think in general, Zonic is not the guy you want within Astralis to rebuild a squad. You know, you don't have Zonic as a head coach to rebuild an entire team, which I think Astralis will have to, right? That team, and let's pretend the Magisk is going to complexity. Sure. Sipnik somewhere else. Glaive may or may not stay. You know, you have another guy in Dupreeh who may or may not go to NIP, has been rumored as well. You don't want Zonic to lead a rebuild of Astralis. I think Hunton, for an example, who's also been rumored to Astralis, is much better to build up talent. Sure. It's much better to foster up talent, and especially if he's going to work with Glaive on that one. So for Zonic, it makes complete sense to me that he don't want to be part of the whole rebuild in Astralis, and Astralis for that matter as well, if I got to take that stance on it as well. Do you want to pay Zonic mega bucks because you have to, because he's probably one of the most expensive coaches, I would say, in the world, or at least, you know, given by the records and what he's achieved? Do you want to pay a guy that much money, given that you may not get the most out of that money because you know that he may not be as invested into it because he's already unsatisfied or unhappy with what's going on? I think it makes complete sense for both parts. I think it'll be great to see Zonic, if you want to continue his career somewhere else, to see if he can do it again with someone else that would also add another level to his career, right? You talk about the Pep Guardiolas in football. He can only win with Messi. He can only win with Bayern Munich, right? Or Manchester City, where all the money is. But if you take Zonic and you put him in complexity and you make Zonic win with complexity, that would add a whole new degree to his legacy, I guess, as a coach. Whether or not he has that motivation to do that, whether he's even interested in that, or he just wants to cash out, as you're saying as well. He does have a family, he does have a child. He's been in the game for forever, basically started playing 1.6 before I was even born. I don't know, but from the pure standpoint, from Astralis' point of view, makes sense. You don't want to pay that much money for a coach who's not invested into the whole rebuild. And for Zonic's point of view, why would you go into this period of 1 year, maybe 2 years, where Astralis is going to be nowhere near a major contending team? To me, it makes complete sense.
What do you think on any angle you want on that, dusT?
Yeah, I mean, I pretty much agree with everything that Pimp just said. I think that he pretty much hit the nail on the head. And I think at this point now, it's just Zonic has to choose what he wants to do with his life. Does he want to retire? Does he want to stay involved as a coach? Does he want to move into more of a GM type situation for an organization? I mean, I feel like the world is kind of his oyster in that regard. I feel like he kind of has a pick of the litter on what he wants to do. I mean, if I'm just thinking about coaching in pure perspective, I think that the only teams that really make sense for him to do if he's not going to be with Astralis is either going over to Heroic or going over to Complexity, because that's like where the most collection of Danish players seems to be if he wants to stay on that route, especially if Complexity does go ahead and pick up Magisk, which, by the way, as we're recording this, it's been officially announced that Rush has been benched. So it does seem like we're very much trending in that direction. So I think that would make, perfect sense for him to be kind of a part of that project, depending on what he wants to do. Again, I think that Zonic right now will probably have so many options. It's going to be unreal what type of offers he's going to get. And it really just comes down to what he personally wants to do, what he's passionate about, what he, feels is best for him personally. It's a massive loss for Astralis. As Pimp said, it's not going to ever be even remotely close to the same Astralis anymore. It's going to be a whole new thing. It's like the biggest piece they could have lost outside of Device or Glaive is Zonic, and very much the identity of that team. Regarded as the best coach in CSGO perhaps of all time, and whoever gets Zonic is going to massively benefit, and Astralis is going to take a huge L here, as they are just continuously doing right now.
I have to say, the angle that Pimp had of this will kind of be a way. He spun it the positive way, which is obviously if he goes and succeeds elsewhere, then no one can say, you had Glaive, you had Device, no one could do that angle, right? The problem is, though, I do have my question marks about that, because it's not that, he's not great. Listen, he had an amazing resume, and if you just heard the stories of some of the things with the players, it sounds like he's a great coach. Even that thing from a few years ago, which I thought was fucking next level when I heard it. You remember when Glaive just started, fragging way above the level he should, and then the rumour was, in scrims, Zonic just calls the strats, Glaive just, frags out in positions, and then in the actual officials is when Glaive called. That's some genius level shit. Other people are still fixing, putting fires out. They are on some level where they can start doing that. So, stuff like that is mad innovative. It's one of the reasons also, by the way, why I hate when people, overestimate that it's Astralis or the fucking sports psychologist who did everything. It's mate, it's the people who are endemic to CS, as far as I can tell, help the CS in the server. Those guys just got them paid, which is an important aspect, but it's different from building the play. It's not we're not football yet, where you can actually have a real academy thing that's bringing players to. That's still a few years away from the true development in that sense. Really, the player's as good as he is. It's on him and the players he's with and his coach, So I believe he was a part of that. But I do think to myself, Pimp, with every element, you do the same with the IGL, you do the same with the star player. You always have to think, what would it be without this piece? Or what would it be with the worst piece next to them? And the problem is, if I'm Zonic, especially the lineup that had fucking Magisk in, mate, you could barely ask for better players. Those already were, when he got them, were 5 of the top 10 Danish players to ever play CSGO. And then you look, there's perfect roles. It's unbelievable how they made that work. So some of these things, it's not that he didn't do any of that. It's just that's not going to be the case in other teams you're playing. As by the way, the people he's talking about there, as the Mourinhos and Pep Guardiolas of the world found out, you don't always get to be in Barcelona or the original Chelsea or Real Madrid. Sometimes you have to go to the team where you got a couple of pieces, and you got this other piece that might be good, and then you got a piece that's not actually that good, and then you're hoping you can get, basically you get to experience life for the rest of us. He was sort of in the prime coaching spot. And I have always thought, because I've been able to do this interesting contrast where I tried to use actually the Mourinho Guardiola angle in the same way as that's actually the angle by which you judge IGLs. So the obvious ones is Carrigan would be Mourinho in this sense, moving around all the time. You got success in totally different regions, and it was more like the idea he comes in, he takes you quickly, you succeed, and then he moves on if he needs to. And obviously the Guardiola, I know now he's sort of done the Mourinho route himself, but obviously for a long time he was with the one team. It was his team. He built it up from the beginning. Simple. That's obviously in IGLs. That'd be like what Glaive was in Astralis. That's why you can do that interesting 1A, 1B thing with it. To be fair, you can do it with coaches. My two for the coaches I personally pick is I do the same thing with Zeus and Zonic. Zeus went everywhere, mate, and there's only basically one team he wasn't successful with, and that was the one he actually won the majors with 4 years earlier. But it's just when he did his sort of last dance one where they weren't very good as a team. Other than that, remember, he succeeded in different Team Liquid squads. Oh, mate, this guy went all over the place and had success. Then you go, obviously, Zonic just stayed in one place and did that. So I always wonder what happens when you try and go and do what the other guy did. Because, by the way, if you can do it, as you say, it can, in some people's minds, it'll end a discussion. You just go instantly if you go to another team and you make... if he took any of these teams that aren't top 5 right now to the top, I mean, that's the ultimate, right?
But that's why he has to be careful, right? Because I agree with you. I think he's a different type of coach, and different types of coach suits different kind of teams and different kind of personalities. I see Sonic more as if you want to keep it in the football references, more like a Carlo Ancelotti, right? I believe he went out saying he can't teach Cristiano Ronaldo to play football. He can't teach Cristiano Ronaldo anything about football, but what he can do is facilitate him and make sure that he feels comfortable in whatever system they're playing and whatever, whatever way they practice or whatever the daily life they have or whatever routine they have before a game, whenever they go on a away game. He can make it as comfortable as possible for Cristiano Ronaldo, right? That's what he went out saying publicly. Same thing when you had dusT. Sonic cannot teach, as you said, Sonic cannot teach dusT or Magisk or gla1ve for that matter to be a better Counter-Strike player. He can maybe put in once in a while. He can maybe facilitate them, make sure they feel comfortable, make sure that he evens out any disagreements that may be within the team. I see, and that's not taking anything away from Sonic, but I think he found his role within Astralis to be not only, of course, this peacemaker within the players, within the team who found the balance between it all, but also had a little bit of strategical insight to the team as well, helping gla1ve with calling and all that kind of stuff. But I see it more as a full balance, right? He was not the guy who came in and made, with all disrespect, right, and gla1ve or Sonic may disagree with that, but from the outside, I didn't see him make gla1ve a better Counter-Strike player. I don't see him make dusT a better Counter-Strike player. But what I think he did so well is he found the balance between being the good cop and the bad cop, right? He was having the players back whenever the orcs were telling them, well, you have to go to the gym, you have to go to do this media, you have to do this, right? So when the players were unsatisfied with that, they could go to Sonic, and they knew Daddy Sonic, he would be, he would be aggressive with that. He wouldn't be happy with that, right? So he was constantly creating a balance within the team where everyone felt comfortable. And as you said, I agree, they had 5 of the best players to ever play Counter-Strike in Denmark at the same time with the perfect roles. Can Sonic do that again in a team like Complexity? Maybe. Is that what Complexity need? I don't think so. I think they need a very strategical-minded coach. I think a guy like Hunten, for an example, would be a perfect fit for Complexity because they need some more depth within the squad. They need a better system. And I'm not too sure Sonic is that kind of coach. Can he be the best coach in the world? On the right team, sure, but he has to find a team that fits him perfectly, where his main role is to create a balance in between the players and not necessarily invent the new system or invent the new way of playing Counter-Strike or create a new meta. Because I don't think Sonic has ever done that, outside of a player like gla1ve. And that's also what I want to rate as well. I think without gla1ve, Sonic wouldn't be considered as much as a strategical genius as he is as a coach, because I'm very biased towards gla1ve. Of course, my relationship with him, but I think gla1ve is the smartest mind to ever play Counter-Strike, and that must have been a very nice thing for Sonic as well. He must have learned a shit ton just by playing with gla1ve, by then being able to be the caller once in a while whenever he needed a break.
Sure. I will say, by the way, just apologies that we're just spamming you with fucking football references. And you're like, bro, I'm from North America. I get there. I might watch the World Cup, but I'm not fucking watching the Premier. So fair enough on that one. With that said, though, I do think another angle that people will have to consider, you mentioned that you had a family, right? That is actually, in my opinion, probably top of the list. One of the things people won't know about the Astralis players is, even though they did actually get that nice run of success where they won tournaments late last year, the whole period ever since the 2 players went on leave, as it were, they've never really been the same Astralis since. And they already had started to look, what are the options? Do we bring someone in? Do we stay together? Do we leave? Now it looks like most of them are splitting apart. I will say, I already told, in Flashpoint, you can imagine, I was telling so many of the orgs, listen, this is what you do. Tell Zonic he can either be coach or GM, whichever role he wants. But the idea is you're going to pay him a blank check as much as he wants, and he's going to do your project, basically. But I did tell them, though, the bad news is most of you are NA orgs, and I don't think a guy with a family who gets to live in Denmark currently and work with a team in Denmark currently is going to want to move across the other side of the world. And by the way, some of that was before we even had all this shit where, who knows how many times you'd have to quarantine and go back and forth. So, I do think that probably limits the number of teams necessary. I know there's not many NA orgs, but, for example, I would have said, if I was someone like Liquid after losing that many times to Astralis, I might be like, yeah, get the fucking coach that did that. But then again, does he want to live in America? I don't know. Probably not, So, and also, I imagine, whereas the other ones, I've heard with a lot of the other ones do just want money. I think even though I can understand the Sweden angle, I think dusT also wanted money as well. I think he wanted different things, I think each player wants something different at this point in their career, because realistically, if you wanted to just win again, you'd probably just keep the whole team and go somewhere else. That was an option if you wanted. In fact, as people might know, Cloud9 could have had him last year. So my problem with this whole thing is I feel like it's probably limited which options you can get from Zonic. And as you say, Pimp, it's not as simple as he was the best, so just put him on any team and he'll succeed. Because in fact, I'll teach you about football. If you know anything about football, actually the careers of people like Mourinho show you this. It's not about whether they're good or bad now. They have to be on the right team. If you give them the wrong team, they can do well because they are brilliant people, but like it's just not the right pieces, not the right style for them, for example. So you also have to get the right style, and that's part of the issue I have as well, because here's another thing I always thought was overblown about Astralis. We talked about this actually on the past episode we did Pimp. It's the idea that like you can ask people who are winning 3 out of 4 tournaments to do the maximum practice. You can ask them to go really hard. You can ask everything of them, basically. You can tell them, I need you to be a model professional. You have to get up early in the morning. You have to do your gym. You have to do your fucking diet. You have to do... Problem is, try telling a guy that when they're on, like, the run phase was on online. Some of them, especially if they're superstar players, they're just going to sort of tell you politely to fuck off, or they're just going to half do, they're going to like, yeah, turn up and I'm jogging a bit when you tell me, sorry, I'm half an hour late. They get players, it's not as simple, like I said on that past episode, it's not as simple as you telling like every other team in the world, do that. Like, it's a nice idea if you could, but to get that buy-in's crazy. So that'll also be a test he'll have to face, by the way, is he has to go into a totally new environment, maybe with totally new players. Maybe it's players he's never coached before. We don't know where he goes yet. And he has to get them all to buy into whatever he wants. I'm also interested, is that even his vision? Was that part of the Astralis idea? Were they trying to go more sports? Maybe because he's old school. Maybe he wants to pare it down and go back to the old school way of doing who the fuck knows? I actually think the Zonic one's the one with the most question marks. Some of the other ones we can sort of fit because we've seen them play. The problem with coaching is to talk about now. Do you want to do the Dupreeh one? Do you want to do the Glaive one? Which way do you want to go now, mate? Your choice.
Yeah, the Glaive one I think is the most interesting because I feel like, again, I don't know if anything's decided yet or not, so it might be too late, but I think he's the one that probably has the most options of anyone as far as like where he can fit in, because obviously he could stay with Astralis, he could try to help them rebuild, but that would depend what other talent could Astralis recruit around him to make it worth his while, unless they're just going to pay him a fat load of cash and that be his incentive to stay. But I mean, you could do so much with this guy as far as like where you could fit in. Like imagine this guy going over to Complexity to be an in-game leader or something, letting BlameF just be a player. You take out JKS and Rush, you bring in Magisk and Glaive, and what do you have there all of a sudden, right? That could be very interesting. You could also put him in a G2 type situation. I think he'd be brilliant for like what they need as far as bringing in more tactics to build around the talent that they have. So I feel like you could go a bunch of directions with that guy as far as like what value he could bring to a bunch of different teams and just lift them up not only on a tactical level but give them like another type of entry type player to help facilitate other talent on the team from a role perspective. So I mean, I think he's like got to be the hottest commodity out of that whole bunch as far as like how rare it is to have a truly great IGL that can also contribute in the fragging department, can speak English, can play on international teams. And that's what a lot of teams lack right now, is like a true IGL. Like a lot of teams are basically based upon IGLs who weren't classic tacticians, but basically just took on the role out of necessity. Like a Nexon G2, for instance, throughout his entire career, it's been more of a necessity than I think something that naturally was his thing. And you could say the same thing about a lot of different teams out there. So yeah, I think that he could be massive for basically any organization that, gets him on their roster.
What do you think, Pim?
I think he could be massive for where I think he's going to end up, which is in Astralis rebuild the whole project. I think that's a shame, right? Because I agree with you, dusT. I think like the opportunity of getting Glaive to your lineup, whether your G2 Complexity, Fnatic for that matter, who's going to a big rebuild,
Fnatic would be huge too. Yeah, I didn't even think about that. That's a perfect one. Yeah,
there's plenty of options, right? And there's plenty of money, I guess, for Glaive to cash in on if he really wants to, if that's within his line of thoughts. But by what I know, from behind the scenes and what I sense is that Glaive is probably going to stay and he's going to be part of this rebuild within Astralis. And I think that's the best thing Astralis could ever hope for. I don't know how they lured him into it. I don't know what they gave him in terms of a contract, in terms of sustainability and maybe comfort. One thing you have to understand as well, Glaive, he's about to be married, or he's already married. Not too sure. Yeah. He's engaged, right? He's having a child as well coming. So the whole, going through a new chapter in his life, right? You don't want to have a work environment where you don't really know where you're going, where you don't have any sustainability. You may go to G2, but let's be honest, do you really want to go to a team like G2 where you don't know what the fuck is going to happen within 6 months? That's could be potentially a bit of a miss. You're standing there with a wife, you're standing there with a kid. So I think if you're Glaive, you're evaluating your options. You're thinking, okay, I have a kid coming. I have a wife coming. You know, I have a very, very comfortable life here in Copenhagen within Astralis. They want to give me even more money, and they want to make me rebuild their project, right? There's a lot of motivational factors in that as well, because as I said with Zonic, if Glaive can rebuild Astralis, if he can make another major winning team out of Bubsky, Lucky, or whoever else who's being rumored to Astralis, you know, not even tier 1, tier 2 talent within Denmark, that would be freaking outstanding, right? Worst case scenario, he still has a long contract with Astralis. He's still getting paid shit ton of money. He's still set for life, and he still has that comfortable living, you know, with his new wife, with his new kid. So I agree, you know, from a pure competition standpoint, I would absolutely fucking love to see Glaive within G2. I would love to see him take some random team, Complexity, Fnatic, whatever, you know, go somewhere out and explore it. But I understand him from a personal point of view, and it makes sense to me if he were to stay within Astralis on a long-term contract.
No, I 100% agree with everything that you just said. I think that the only question that I have then, if we're going along that line of logic, which I think is pretty flawless, is what the fuck can you recruit around this guy to make Astralis still good? Like, let's forget about Glaive's personal situation and like what motivates him and like all the pros of basically staying with Astralis. If you're Astralis, you need to keep Glaive. If you're really losing Zonic and you've already lost Device and you're potentially losing other star players, like if you don't hold on to Glaive, then like what do you have? You have nothing. So it's absolutely imperative that Astralis finds a way to keep Glaive if they want to maintain presence in the top CSGO space. But if I'm Glaive, you know, unless it really is just about the stability, the finances, you know, the comfort and all that good stuff, like Astralis has to be coming to this guy with proposals on like talent that they can acquire. And so unless they're somehow going to hijack Valda from OG, or they're somehow going to get some like players from Heroic coming over or something like that, Pimp, you might as well fucking dust your mouth off, because like you might be one of the best recruiting options that they have at this point that isn't like some young unproven player from one of the lower tier teams. So
but that's the risk Astralis is running as well, right? Because if you're getting a Glaive on, let's say, a long-term contract, could be 2 or 3 years, right? And you don't have those plans in front of you, and he's thinking, you know, he's going to do it anyway because he's getting the stability, he's getting the money, he's getting the long-term contract. You may end up with a Glaive that is not motivated, right? And I've played with Glaive for 2 or 3 years, and a Glaive that is motivated, he's the smartest mind in Counter-Strike I've ever seen, I've ever played with, and he can take any fucking team and he can make them at the very least, a top 10 team, even if he's only getting, you know, tier 2, tier 3 talents within Denmark. You don't even need a Valda. You just need, you know, some young kids who wants to buy into the project, wants to put in a lot of hours, and I have fully faith in Glaive being 100% focused and 100% motivated with the backing of Astralis. They'll still be a top 10 team. They'll still occasionally be in a playoff. They'll still occasionally be annoying to the Navis, the Gambits, or whatever the teams are going to be called in the future of the Worlds. But you're right, you know, but if you end up with a Glaive that is not getting those plans proposed, and he's not satisfied with getting in a Lucky from Tricked, or getting in whatever the fuck they're called from the Astralis talent team, yada, right? You end up with a Glaive that is on a 3-year contract. He's no longer motivated, and he won't be doing a good job for you. He'll be fine, he'll be decent, they'll be a top 15 team, but is that enough for you, right? So you gotta find a way if you're Astralis, and that's the big puzzle I guess they have to figure out. One, securing Glaive, that's well done, but you gotta find something that can motivate him outside the money, outside the sustainability. Because Glaive, not motivated, we saw it even, like, 6 years ago, 7 years ago, he retired. He didn't want to play. He didn't touch Counter-Strike, as in he didn't touch Counter-Strike at all. Didn't even play for fun for a year and a half. Then he got the motivation back. Then he found a new project, he found it fun again, and he got on to be the best in-game leader that Counter-Strike has ever seen, right? So if you're Astralis, I agree. Not only do you have to find players that motivate him, but you got to find a sort of like a vision for him, right? You got to say, this is your team, Glaive. We are 100% backing it on you. And if that's not enough to motivate you, don't sign this contract, right? I hope those conversations have been had. Otherwise, you end up in a lose-lose, both for Astralis and for Glaive.
Sure. The thing is, though, I definitely agree with you, Pimp. I think personally, what motivates him is his literal personal life situation at the moment. Like, again, he's sort of just entering the period that Zonic was in, like, I think 4 years ago, something where he's starting the family and all that stuff. Like, basically, add in these factors. One, he is someone who has literally had multiple injuries in his career. He's had the lung collapse and all sorts of things. He's the guy. Remember, people forget this. Dude, he was the one who took the break, not Device, even though Device is the one who has, like, ongoing issues. Like, Device kept playing the whole time. So that even implied to me, by the way, when I saw that move happened and I heard some of the things behind the scenes, I thought to myself, fuck, I hope the guy doesn't just straight retire. Like that was probably an option in his mind at some point in mind. Maybe thought about it. You ride out one last year. That's another reason why actually this is an example of where, even though it's the best thing for Astralis, you keep him, because I definitely agree with that. For me, the top 3 people you had to keep was, in this order, Device, Glaive, Zonic, and you already lost one potentially 2 of the 3, you got to at least keep 1 to keep some vision that you're going to be a great team, right? But the problem is this, that could actually end up being a deal that fucks you. Like, if you give him what he wants, 3 years, great contract, we'll put players on you, we'll give you 100 so he gets you the next talents. Listen, that sounds great, but the problem is, if there's a next year, he just decides these players aren't actually that good anymore, and you know what, I've got a nice lifestyle, and they're a good team, but as you say, we're a top 10 team sometimes, and we have good runs occasionally, and what do you want me to do? These are new players. Like, that's the problem. It's like, you haven't really got Glaive at that point in time, have you? You just got a guy who's just sort of being Glaive 60% of the time or something. And that's the reason why a general rule in Counter-Strike is, it's why people who either go into massive slumps for years or straight retire, it's the reason they don't tend to come back. It's not that they couldn't, but whatever reasons made you sort of fall out of love with playing the game, you're probably not going to just fall in love with it again. You might think you do. You might want the money again. You might have all these good reasons to, or 2 days out of the week you might feel like it. But that is different from being like a hardcore, every day, like trying to be the champion. And he's done that for a long time as well. People forget they've been in that team for like fucking 5 years now or something. What, maybe 4.5 or something. Like, that's a long period of time. Like, I wouldn't blame anyone, by the way, who retired after how long Glaive's played. He played in Source as well, for fuck's sake. Like, he's actually had an insanely long career. I think, to me, the interesting angle on this is, I would say this, if I was saying to Glaive, I'd say, listen, mate, unless you tell me all that stuff personally, and that's why you're doing it. If you think this is at all the competitive move, you are out your fucking mind, and like, look, just enjoy the money. But with that said, if I had to do it, the one possible solution to what we were saying, like, who do you get? Well, to be fair, if they do indeed get Hundred as their coach, mate, has anyone in the history of Counter-Strike gone out into just like a random crowd of people, pulled 4 people off and made them all pro players more times than Hundred? This guy is ridiculous. If people don't know, Glaive's already himself played with Hundred. In fact, there's a team, if you want to look it up, this is pure banter, because this is why, like, Hundred must be such a good IGL, but he must also make other people think, I could do that. Because they had this team Pimp, this Copenhagen Wolves lineup, and I'll tell you the lineup. Are you ready? So it was Hunden, the IGL. It was Glaive. You're all thinking, you just said Hunden. Yeah, Glaive wasn't the IGL. And then he had Snappy. That's another IGL for it. No, he was just a player. And then they had Percy. Isn't he an IGL for a lot of it? Yeah, he is, but he wasn't at the time. And then they had SMF, who's just a super old school fucking Source player that played with them all. But like, this is ridiculous.
Terrible lineup.
Dude, that's like you should just recruit MSL and make it the fucking all IGL team at that point in time. What even is this? Are they all that meme of like, like, I made this? Like, it's like, I'm the IGL. Like, I'm the IGL now. Like, what the fuck is this shit? Like, what, you all just think you can IGL? Like, this is ridiculous. So I will say, he's obviously worked with them in the past, so I'm pretty sure he knows how smart he is about the game. And as I said, mate, that's got to be the ultimate guy to get talent. Like, I would put it this way, I don't know if there are the talents out there, but I would trust he's the one to find them if there are. Look at how many times he's done it. And I'll even throw this in. A lot of people had their questions, could he do it at tier 1? Because obviously until Mad Lions, he was basically demanded he kept playing. Now, once he became coach, obviously he left Mad Lions basically immediately, right? He became the heroic coach. This is what people forget. Go and look. And as cynical as it sounds, Heroic's period as number 1, and as an elite team with the old lineup, the one before Shush, etc., it literally lasts until like a month after Hunden was banned. Now, if people don't know, I have a principle called like the IGL hangover, where I think like, if you kick your IGL tomorrow, it's not like everyone has to delete the strats out their brain. You can still do them. So as a result, you might still be good for another month or something. You might be good for like another 2 tournaments. I'm pretty sure coaching, the same thing applies, whatever they helped you with. So to me, then you look at his drop-off, it's literally the time he was banned. And then when he comes back, yeah, they did a roster move. By the way, he probably also had some say in that. It was his old players. But then you look, mate, they immediately became one of the best again. Like, this guy's track record is really impressive, I have to say.
No, yeah. If you have to replace Zonic, that's probably the only option that makes sense for Astralis is Hunden, just based on everything that you said. I mean, if they do retain Glaive and they do bring in Hunden, they have basically made the best moves they possibly could given the situation.
Yeah, under the circumstances. Yeah. The other angle as well I'll also throw in is, like, listen, I had heard previously, I hadn't, by the way, heard like Glaive's going there, but I'd just heard, like, because G2 are so legit, by the way. I know they do it publicly, but they're privately, they'll be the same. They're not the ones, mate, who are like, unless I really know you. Like, I am actually friends with Carlos, but they're not the ones that are like, oh, I can't give journalists any info. They're just cocky. They'll be like, yo, of course I'd sign that player. Because the joke is like, I can't sign today. So it's like, fuck, go and do whatever you want with that info. By the way, if you get that info to him, maybe that even makes him want to join. Maybe if the fans say it, you don't, like, they're actually smart about media like that, right? So they basically told me ages ago, like, oh, don't worry, I've been trying to have conversations with Glaive, and listen, I would definitely sign him tomorrow if I could. Like, if people don't know, like the Nico move, Carlos wants to fucking win in Counter-Strike. He doesn't just want to have League of Legends and these other Rainbow Six or whatever. He wants to be able to say, I'm fucking Thanos, motherfucker. I've got all the games. Like, I've got the best in this game too. And here's what's funny. Even though I do sort of agree, I think Glaive's good enough in almost any team he could make it work. Like, I'll give you an example. Fans are going to do with MSL what they did with Glaive. They're going to say, MSL can only run set executes. It's like, first of all, that was like MSL like 7 years ago or something, mate. Like, humans can evolve, and he has played with many different players since then, and he always assures me, look, I can definitely like do mid-round, and I can be a lot looser, you know. Problem with Astralis is, like, the iconic round, everyone knows the round everyone thinks from Astralis. It was when they were against Fnatic, they were at map point on fucking Inferno, at like, I think, I can't remember if it was IM Chicago or Pro League, or what it might be in Pro League. One of those tournaments at the end of 2018, and they did that perfect Molly B execute, that literally just perfect. They took every angle flawlessly, and they came back in the game, they won the game, and obviously they won the tournament, right? Now, when everyone thinks of that, listen, that is his execute. That is a set strat with protocols and timings. But, like, you have to understand, Astralis were the GOATs because they were doing everything in the playbook. And if you don't think Glaive was mid-rounding in Astralis, you are out of your motherfucking mind. The reason why he was the best is he had the strats, the prep, the pieces, the rolls, and the mid-rounds. That's why they were unbeatable. Because I've heard the stories, mate, of the other IGLs. They went in the demos and tried to anti-strat because they were thinking, look, if he's going to do an execute, you can figure that out. I can figure out what the... He would switch it up. It's like the time you would do the anti-strat, he would just do a fucking another genius call, and like next thing you know, and then you're like, wait a minute, that wasn't even in the playbook. That wasn't even on the demos. So if people think he couldn't go to a team and do a loose style, he could. Now, what's funny is Richard has an angle that I don't disagree with, which is, as much as Nico's a brilliant individual player, it is just obvious if you look at his career, it's not just that he's had bad teammates. He's had some excellent teammates, and sometimes they don't always work out. He's clearly like a tricky player to play with, because he can always get his, but I don't always know if he's like the most sick teammate, or, you know, what his vision for the game is. Now, here's what's funny. Richard thinks that, like, that's why he wouldn't want this move to happen, because he basically thinks, like, either, like, Glaive would either have his issues dealing with Nico, like Nico would act up, or the other way around, like Nico just wouldn't like how strict Glaive could be. Because, by the way, I had this concept I came up with years ago with when Happy and ochs used to play together, where Happy used to tell me, like, you do not understand ochs as the star player ego. And I was like, motherfucker, you've got the IGL ego. That exists as well, you know. There's an IGL ego where you're like, we're doing it my way, this way. If you don't like it, like, get out. You know, like, there's an IGL ego when you're very successful. But here's the difference, though. If that move happened, we're making it a big hypotheticals. I agree with him. I think he probably stays with Astralis. Say he went to G2. Here's the angle, though, why I would still be hyped. Because I would hope if you went to G2, it suggests none of the things we said before. It suggests you still want to be number one. You still want to, like, take pieces and be best. Well, here's the difference. If you would want to make it like these players and their egos, this is the difference, right? I would hope this is what happens. If you're Glaive and you join, you think to yourself this, people are going to say, I just won because I had Device. He had all the MVPs, right? Mate, give me Nico, I can prove that's not true. That's a fucking mad motivator. And if you're Nico, listen, mate, I've had my issues with you, but if you really can't handle playing under Glaive, might be time for you to just quit it. You might have to be the IGL again, mate. Like, if you can't fucking deal with that. Because I would think this if I'm Nico. Now, listen, Nico might not agree. He thinks very differently to me, dusT. But if I'm Nico, my angle would be this. I'm not going to be the one superstar player who didn't work under Glaive, because then I look like a fucking idiot, don't I? Like, I've just seen them. I've even played against them and thought, this is unfair. Well, now I get the chance to have that guy. So I agree. The sad thing about these moves, by the way, is I think moves like this, and even Dupreeh maybe, some of these guys could have gone anywhere they wanted. So I'm actually very interested where they chose, because the interesting thing to me, as we've done a lot here, is I actually do think where they're choosing tells a lot about where their head is at. It's actually not about, like, what team are they joining into. They want.
Definitely.
It's more.
I believe he's been staying in Sweden a lot. I believe he's been. Did he have a Swedish girlfriend at some point? I'm not too sure about.
I think at some point in the early days he did.
Yeah, I think he has some connection to Sweden anyway, and he's a very goofy guy. Obviously loves Device. I've had a great relationship playing with him for what, 7 years, all the way from Copenhagen was TSM to Astralis. So to see Astralis lose Device and for Dupreeh to lose Astralis, for Dupreeh to lose Device, I think that was the one player who took it to heart the most. Sure. So to see them reunite on NIP makes sense from a personal level, from a personal perspective. I know Dupreeh is a guy who can also adjust to, let's say he has to live in Stockholm. I don't think that's going to be a problem for him, or even Pendle from Stockholm to Copenhagen easy. From a Counter-Strike perspective, I think that's the perfect signing for NIP. I think that would be beautiful. I am not a big fan of the approach they're doing right now with bringing in these talents left, right, and center. I think LNC has been doing a decent job. I think CTR was simply not ready for it. And I even spoke to Jonas, the GM of NIP, and I was like, dude, you gotta, before we knew the whole thing with the major, you got a major
Sure.
coming up in Sweden, right? With NIP. You finally have a team where you invest into device, you bring in a star player, a player that is undoubtedly gonna make you better. You put down $1 million, you give him a big fat contract, and you're still jeopardizing the future and you're still jeopardizing the immediate success of NIP by bringing in these lone players. He even told me that there were possibilities of signing, legit players that already proved their worth on top tier Counter-Strike, whether they would be Swedish, Danish, or some international player, don't know. But they wanted to stick to the whole, regime of bringing up talent through the ranks, which I respect from a business perspective, instead of having to go out and spend a shit ton of money on buying players 24/7, But as you said, Thorin, I think it's 1 or 2, maybe 3 years out in the future before we get to see the academy teams established enough that we can start to bring up players through the ranks, right? So right now you have a major coming up for NIP. You have to find success. You did very well in the first RMR. You're going to qualify for that major. You don't want to jeopardize the success. You don't want to jeopardize bringing over device, paying $1 million for him or whatever you paid for him, and not have a team that can compete at that major. You want to sign someone who is class. You want to sign someone who has the stability and who had the level to perform at the very highest level, and you get that in Dupreeh. Even from a player perspective, the role he could fit into makes perfect sense. I think Dupreeh going to NIP could be one of the best signings, not only for NIP, but by the rankings of the best signings ever in Counter-Strike, if they make that work. I think it makes an awful lot of sense for me, and I think that would make NIP competitive at the very highest level. Rest is a fantastic player. Device, he's immediate class, and I think Dupreeh still got it. Hampus, to me, one of the most underrated in-game leaders. Sure. I think Threat as a coach is a fantastic coach. I think he's very good, very his knowledge about the game. He reminds me a bit about Hunten in some areas. I think he's very, very articulated as well. I think NIP has the potential to be one of the best teams in the world if they secure Dupreeh. So to me, it makes an awful lot of sense.
Right, there's actually breaking news, which I won't mention now because obviously me and dusT are going to give our thoughts on the Dupreeh move. But if you just go and look on hltv.org, there's a move for complexity. And what we'll do is this. Look at it now, Pimp. Me and dusT will give our thoughts on Dupreeh, and then we'll do this move actually because it'll be in the episode whenever it is tomorrow probably. So, right, dusT, what do you think of the Dupreeh to NIP move?
I
if
like
it
it from
indeed
this
happens, obviously.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think from this perspective, it's the perfect move. I really agree, with everything that Pimp basically said. I mean, you already brought in Device. That's your marquee signing, right? You brought in the best opper as far as fundamentals go, probably in the world, and biggest consistency track record of any player in CSGO history, most likely. So you have that, but you have to reinforce that investment. You can't just live out on that alone because that's not enough to make this team what it needs to be a world contender, right? So from the NIP side of things, you have to invest deeper. And I think that building around Hampus as your IGL is great because there's not many other IGL options out there unless you somehow sucker Glaive over as well. And he does frag pretty well. You have Threat as the coach infrastructure behind that team. I think that's great. But here's the problem with NIP. One, Plotsky just massively fell off. I'm not sure what the hell happened, but after a few good events, he had a couple of bad ones that he's never really recovered since. The LNZ guy's not been around long enough to really trust how good he can be long-term for this team, in my opinion. So I think that in the end of the day, probably both those players are going to go at some point, right? But let's say you're going to just replace one of them for now. It would make sense to bring in Dupreeh because he can be that follow-up fragger to Hampus, to help with the entry force of the team. You have Device as your opper, and then you just kind of have to build around that a little bit. It can also free up Rez, I think, to be a little bit more flexible and not have to be the guy, going in behind Hampus or something like that. It can allow him to be a little bit more flexible, maybe make him even more comfortable because he has less pressure on his shoulders to be one of the guys trying to create openings for the team. So I think from the NIP perspective, I think Dupreeh is a perfect, entry-type fragger player that they need to help reinforce the talent of this team. What I would say, though, and it's just something that we kind of talked about the whole Magisk thing, is this really the best move for Dupreeh? Imagine Dupreeh on FaZe for Rain for a second there.
Oh, that would be banging, yeah.
Yeah, I don't know if FaZe is interested in that. I don't know, if Dupreeh would be interested in that. But
certainly,
I think, but
no, just from the GM perspective,
move.
yeah, of course.
Yeah, from the fan perspective, that's the banger move right there. That makes FaZe instantly better. You build town up around Twist and Brokey. You have Kerrigan as your tactician. They still have to figure out a fit situation, I think, for Olaf, which might be Xyp9x. So now you get to recruit two guys who have been playing together on Astralis. That's the freaking move I would love to see personally. But let's say that can't happen for whatever reason. My dream of FaZe getting Xyp9x and Dupreeh for Rain and Olaf isn't possible. Then the next best thing probably is NIP, unless you're just force-fitting him into heroic for some reason, which doesn't seem right, to me. It doesn't really make much sense. So I think after the FaZe dream, I think the NIP thing is definitely the way to go, in my opinion.
I think it's important to understand as well for the Astralis players and for Dupreeh and Device in particular, right, that they've been indoctrinated in this Astralis setup, the whole having a big team behind you, the whole having, an office, the whole, trying to be more professional in your approach with Counter-Strike. NIP is trying to copy that, right? They want to build on that. They want to make it better. So I think if you're Dupreeh, if you're Device, you think you're going from something you as you said, Thorin, they may not have agreed with Casper Witt on everything they did, right? They may think that was a little bit over the line. Here they have a chance to go to NIP and build up that project from the bottom, right? They have to go in and say the best stuff within Astralis was this, and this, and whatever the fuck we did over here, we don't want to do that shit again, right? So they have a chance, I guess, of building the perfect home for themselves while still being very, very competitive in the game. I think it's a perfect move for Dupreeh, and I think NIP, if they can secure Dupreeh, I think that'll be absolutely stellar done by them. And they have done some questionable moves when it comes to roster signings and bringing in these youngsters,
Yeah.
Right, prep your takes, because I'm just going to go on a little rant here, right? So first of all,
I'm ready.
I'll start on the angle of, like, if you're NIP. Listen, if you're NIP, it's about the best signing you could do. Like, of all the Astralis players, listen, I'd like to have Glaive as well. Like, that would also be my number one again. Sure. But with that said, I agree with you. I actually think Hampus has been fairly underrated. I even kind of like his playing style in the game. I think he's one of those guys where one thing I've always loved about in-game leaders is if you're an in-game leader who can figure out how to frag within your own system without taking resources, that is such an OP quality. It's one of the factors, actually, if people know the old school 1.6 player, Ave, that was one thing he was very good at. He wasn't some like mad skilled player. He just knew how to do it. Everyone else have their role, run the tactic, and then within the tactic, here's the best spot for me to get a kill or for me to back someone up, And if you can do that, I mean, let's be real, like Glaives was the best ever at probably, but Hampus has been pretty legit in it. Like, he's not one of the players I look at, I see problems with. The only problem I have is, and I also think, by the way, for Device, listen, if this isn't your dream move, it's the move that you literally, like, fucking demanded. Like, I could also believe that. I could believe there's a world, because that's another thing I think as well. Device himself implied with all those comments of, like, we're going to build a system here and it's possible. All those comments he made, like, if you get the first win, you can get eras and everything. And, and was 5 steps ahead with practice. And I wanted to be the number one player one year. He made it sound, Pimp, like, I don't need anything else. This is just the team, like, just add me to the team. But it's like, listen, Device, you actually taught yourself this year the reason you weren't number one those past years, because you aren't Simple, mate. Like, actually Simple literally could walk in a room with any 4 people at this point in time and actually carry. Like, because he's just not human, mate. Like, you have to understand, it's not your fault. It's not your fault. Nobody can do that. Like, Zero himself is looking over going, it's true, nobody can do that. Like, that's how unfair it is. Like, it's like when Michael Jordan played. Listen, there was a lot of really great players in that era who just never won the championship because Michael Jordan played. I'm sorry. So my problem with this is, right, I think for Device, it's the perfect signing. Because not only, again, are those, like I said about before when I was waxing about Magisk and Config, those are 2 great players, 0 role overlap. They also get along together. They get along even better. The others 2 were just teammates, basically. They never had that romantic element. These 2 obviously really like each other, vibe with each other. This is the element I think is perfect to a Device. I think one thing that Device learned from coming to NIP that he didn't realise because of how great he's had it in all those amazing teams over history is, when you're the AWPer, you want some comfort as well. You want to know that, like, players around you are going to play a set way. They're going to cover a certain flank. They've got experience. They know what I'm doing here. Like, if you don't have all that stuff, that's why you have to be an eco or a Simple, because you have to brute force it at that point in time. You've got, like, an unideal situation, inefficient squad. And I think what he learned in this team was, it's fucking brutal when players play bad and when you've got a rotating 5th player and it's always inexperienced and then we're swapping out who IGLs, mate. That's a nightmare. I don't think he knew what he was walking into when he went in that team. So if you can get Dupreeh, you already know. Dupreeh, like Device, by the way, in his career, it's unbelievable how few slumps these motherfuckers have had. Like, I don't know what they've done. Them and Simple have just tapped into, like, the ultimate fountain of youth where it's like, you can just regenerate every 6 months. I don't know how they do it. It doesn't make sense because it's not supposed to work like that. They're having, like, football type careers where you have like a 10-year career that you're good. In Counter-Strike, you're supposed to fall off every year or, rediscover yourself in a new role every 2 years. Like, so to me, it'd be brilliant. Obviously, as an entry player, you'll be amazing. Like, if you threat, that's your dream as well. I agree with dusT, though. On the other side, ignoring the part about, listen, I do imagine this is probably where Dupreeh wants to go at this point in his career, and I don't think he probably wants to go abroad, etc. If I had to do, like, Football Manager, tell you what, I wouldn't mind Dupreeh on G2 as well. There's a fucking move right there. Because everyone's doing all these moves. Oh, but who could replace Jax if he is like playing hard entry and stuff? Mate, you wanna play hard entry, motherfucker? I've got one of the original OGs, and guess what? Yeah. He's the only one still standing. Guess all of his peers from all that. Bialy and like, mate, they're all gone. They're dead. Freiburg, I know he still plays, but dead now, of course. R.I.P. None of them are around. Like, this guy, listen, that's what the doctor ordered. The problem I have is, like, I don't think he's going to do a move like that personally.
It'd have to be with Glaive as a combination. I feel like I don't think he would.
That would be cool.
Himself.
That would be cool as well. Yeah. All right, let's do this then. Let's do it. So basically, it was announced, actually, as we're doing this podcast, not that Magisk is going or isn't, but an even more interesting side angle, because this makes it, there's a lot more this actually brings to this table. Complexity's just signed ErikHillestad. So initially, they've just signed ErikHillestad, right? Thoughts, dusT? What do you think?
This is so underwhelming, man. I'm just going to be 100% real about it. It's not even that ErikHillestad is bad. He's a pretty decent player, but let's be honest. His stock got massively inflated over a couple of events he played with Astralis. Cloud9 bought into it. And while that whole project had a bunch of other issues, then it probably wasn't just that ErikHillestad didn't play as well as people thought he would based on his inflated stock on those couple of Astralis stand-in events. I still just, if you're Complexity, right? You needed to bring in a banger. You needed to bring in a guy who could frag out hard and could actually be another star player for your team alongside like a BlameF and a Config, unless Poise is going to somehow magically recover at some point, which doesn't seem to be the case. He looks like he's just going to be kind of a decent guy that can create space because he's willing to take a lot of opening duels and create space for his teammates, which is useful in itself that he's an aggressive opera to create that space. There's a lot of operas out there on top teams that won't do that, a.k.a. Jame, a.k.a. Shiro. At least he's the guy that will go out there and brawl, but he's not putting out the fragging output that the team really needs to go toe-to-toe with some of the other talented rosters out there right now. And so for me, that's why Complexity needed to get a Magisk. They needed to get a guy who had potential to do that. I'm sorry, man. I think ErikHillestad is a solid player, but he's probably gonna be your third or fourth best player on the team, which puts even more stress, I feel like, on Config and BlameF to perform. And I don't think it gives the team enough. He probably will perform better than Rush has been performing, because Rush has had a really rough time, if we're honest, throughout this year. So I imagine that he will have higher ratings and higher KD ratios than Rush, and can play that same role. I mean, I feel like ErikHillestad is like a Swiss Army knife in that perspective, where he can play a bunch of different roles at a pretty high level, so you can kind of just slot him in as a glue player anywhere. So I think role wise, and he will be a slight upgrade to Rush, but all I'm getting at is it's not the exciting move I feel like that you wanted if you're a Complexity fan. I feel like this is just kind of almost settling in a way, and I feel like you're probably going to need another blockbuster move, I feel like, to make this team work.
Hopefully Magisk as well. Yeah, of course.
Yeah, you need them both, I feel like.
Yeah. What do you think, Pimp?
So JKS would have to go then too, I guess.
Oh yeah, that'd be interesting, right? Because
now I'm excited. I'm excited now if you bring in that. Yeah.
I think it's a comfort pick, right? I think ErikHillestad, I agree with you, Josh. I think his reputation was completely being overestimated when he was in Astralis doing well for a couple of tournaments, a couple of games basically, brought into the Cloud9 lineup, and I think the way he thought about himself and the way we had to all of a sudden approach him was that he was supposed to be some sort of a star, and I don't know where that line of thought ever came from, right? Because he was never a star player. I don't think ErikHillestad has ever been a player that I looked towards and had any star potential. He never took over the games. He never took over the server. He was always very solid. I think he's a very smart player. I think he's very cerebral. I think he's very good at playing different roles as well. I think you're spot on when you're saying he's a Swiss Army knife, and I think he can do a lot of different roles within the game. But his best year till this day ever, rating-wise, overall the season is 1.03. Normally, averaging around 1.01. Ever since he went into Tier 1 Counter-Strike, he's not been able to replicate the performance he could when he was in Tricked, when he played against Tier 2, Tier 3, Tier 4 shit teams. So ErikHillestad, to me, if he thinks about himself as a star player, this is a terrible move. If he comes into this lineup thinking, okay, I know my place now. I know I tried to go to Cloud9. I tried to be the AWP player. I tried to be the guy they could rely on. I tried to be the star player. I found out I wasn't good enough for that. I didn't have that skill ceiling. I didn't have that skill cap to do that, but I can still be one of the very best role players, one of the very best supportive elements in the game. If that's the mentality, if that's what he's supposed to do within Complexity, I think he's a massive upgrade to Rush. I think he can be very, very good, and I think he can elevate this team a lot, but it depends on what kind of role he wants first and foremost, what kind of role he gets, and more so what kind of attitude he comes in with. Because I don't think ErikHillestad has it to be one of the best players in Denmark. Honestly speaking, I think he's a good player, but he's been around for forever, and he's never really amazed me in any way. And I may sound rough here, but he can be a good role player and nothing more than that.
That's fair.
Yeah, my problem with this move is, I'll take it just from the ErikHillestad angle first, is I do think, unfortunately, he definitely got overinflated in Astralis. That goes without saying. People were literally, dude, do you remember this? There was people saying, don't even bother bringing Zipnix back. Shut the fuck up. Whoever that is, throw him out. Throw that guy the fuck out the bed. You know what I mean? People were going way too hard on that shit. Then also, when he went to Cloud9 rather, as you say, at one point in time when Kovacevicd was fired, he had to be the AWPer. And mate, the idea, even though I love the idea that someone is a glue guy and he'll say, I'll do whatever you need. It's mate, you shouldn't even be saying yes to that move. The answer should be, we need an AWP. I'm not the answer. I could do it for an event, but I'm not the full-time answer, because
I'm going to write a book about how they can fuck up your career at some point.
At all.
Yeah, it's bad.
And let's be real, you know this. I just hate when players do that when I don't feel like either A, they can do it, or even worse, I feel like they'll switch back eventually. It's like IGL. If you're going to switch back eventually, like unless we really just need it for one event, don't do it. Just, let's just get through it and let's just get a guy that can do it. Like, basically, my problem with this move overall, I have to say, let me think out of... I'll say this as well. I do think, though, one thing that was a bit unfair about his time in Cloud9 is I actually do think if you viewed him as a supportive element, he actually played all right. Like, he actually was one of the elements I thought was better. I thought him and Alex and Mezzy, I thought those were the three that were good. I thought it was the others that had either inexperience or when they were, like, Woxic was just bad, wasn't he? Like, so I actually thought they're the ones who sort of got fucked because, remember, those results were actually super close. Like, I thought some of those players were doing their job. The problem is this. Everyone knows, I was part of revealing it, that he got paid fucking megabucks. And the problem is he got paid by the way, he got paid more than like fucking like Simple, etc. So like, if you are getting that money, I'm sorry, like you sort of do have to be a star just the way the game works. Like, and not only do fans know that, Cloud9 knows it. So they're also going to look and go, why did we buy this guy for this much, pay him this much salary if he's not going to be like the best player, at least his role, like even if not in the team. So I think he was painted into a corner. So he could essentially, it was a poison chalice. You have to say yes to the offer, but you can only sort of fail those expectations. Now for the complexity side, there's two ways I can go on this. One is this. I'm just hoping, and this is mad copium pimp, I'm hoping this isn't instead of Magisk. This is with me. Because if it's instead, I'm with dusT. I'm mad underwhelmed. I'm just like, listen, Jason Lake, have you been reading Reddit from a year ago? Like, what the fuck are you... Did you not see... what are you talking about, bro? Instead of Magisk. But if Magisk is coming as well, now I'm hyped. Because now that gives a different dimension. Like, listen, I know wisetown can be Zipnix in that sense. If you want that rounding out element, or even be an entry element, if you want to work with config, I'm sure they'd love working each other. I also think this element... You know that meme? I don't know what kids' program it's from, because I'm a boomer, obviously. You know the meme where there's two pictures? It's sort of a monkey image. One's where he's looking forwards, and then one's where he's looking slightly like to the side of his eye, and it's like, when you're sort of giving someone like the sly eye. This is my joke. That's what fucking Poison's going to be like if Magisk and wisetown, because you're just like, wait a minute, for Danish players, and I know Danish players do prefer to speak Danish, and I've got no chance of learning Danish in the next 6 months because I haven't learned fucking tier 1 Orpin, so I'm this is all just fine, right, Jason? Like, yeah, this is fine. And by the way, welcome to the new coach, Zonic. Like, you know what I mean? Like, give me a break. Like, listen, please, all I'm going to say, mate, is get in DM. Just get in that DM. Just live in DM at this point in time, because your days are numbered if 4 Danish players get together like that. Especially because, by the way, as we've been talking about with Hundred and all the different players over the years, the one scene that doesn't lack depth at any particular position, probably the Danish scene. That I can tell you right now, like 3 Danish Orpers that are good. So it's going to get rough if that happens. So listen, again, for complexity, if we get Magisk as well, I like the move. I think it's a good move overall. It shows also, by the way, ambition. It even shows, like I said before, you really are committing to the idea. We're not an NA org. Yeah. Oh, we're an NA org, but we're not an NA team, rather. Like, maybe we just bring you for the boot camps to the facility.
You have to get the facility aspect of this, I feel like.
In a way,
go into things, I feel like it. Yeah.
But I will say,
you're going to move
that's
4
cool.
names over NA permanently.
Because the problem is this, they've had those facilities when they had some of the shit lineups before as well. So I will say this, it sounds cool, but if you're not actually putting a world-class team into it, whether in private, like, listen, all we have to do is do another month by any means necessary, and the money appears in the account. Motherfuckers, we're getting paid 20k a month. We are Polish. You are aware of that. So whatever you have to say, Neo, it's your turn. You're going to go and do an interview that makes it sound like we just need another month. Listen, I can't blame you. You get 20k every month. So part of me does feel like that's also the equation at play here. Like, because I will say this, if we do this move, Zipnix to FaZe, after the FaZe result that's just happened, Pimp, people are going to be hyped. People think that's the piece. What do you think on this move?
I think that'd be great. I think if you get a Zipnix that I think slowly but surely is getting back after his break. It took some time. Like, he was not playing well after his sick leave, but he was doing well at Cologne. I think Zipnix is one of those players that, mentally he's just unrockable, right? You look at the guy and he doesn't have any emotions, it seems like. I think he's going to work well within FaZe Clan. I think he's going to work well with Kerrigan. I think he likes when he's being, told to do a certain job and just... or like go in with a robotic mindset almost. I think he could work within FaZe. I also think he'll be a great upgrade to Olofmeister. No disrespect at all to Olofmeister, but I'm getting sick and fucking tired of the Olofmeister fan club out there, right? Because he's a legend of the game, and he was to my understanding, one of the best players to ever touch the game when he was on fire, even in practice. Like, he didn't touch olofmeister at all. But the way he's playing right now is nowhere near that level. Yet you still see people go out there and defend him. After Colonial, right? He was having a decent event. He wasn't bad by no means. He was doing a good job. And people went out there saying he had a fantastic event. It was a great event. You're so good, olofmeister. It's so good to have you back. Like, the rate they keep him up to, the level of... Like, the level he produces on the server and he doesn't get flagged for is not okay with me if you're FaZe Clan, if you want to be one of the best teams in the world. I believe I even said it on a dusT segment on Blast, and my Twitter was freaking bleeding for hours and hours after, right? Because there's so many olofmeister fanatics out there. He's a great guy. I think it's very impressive. He can come back and still play at a somewhat decent level, because he is decent. He's not bad at all. He's just decent. If you're FaZe Clan, you want to be the best team in the world. You brought in Kerrigan, you pay him a shit ton of money, you give him 6 months to rebuild this lineup, you give him all the pieces you need, you bring in Twist as well. At least give us the courtesy of actually going all in and have 5 players who are in it for good, who really, really wants to be good again. I think Xyp9x will be a perfect addition, and I think he'll be much, much better than olofmeister on long term. And I think you're right. You know, he's playing because he's still on a contract. He's playing because he may or may not is exploring whether or not he's going to refine that fire. But he hasn't been playing consistent Counter-Strike for 2.5 years, ever since he went on a league, right? So he's not going to come back at that level ever.
Thoughts?
So I mean, I 100% agree that Xyp9x is the perfect replacement for olofmeister, and it's definitely going to increase the value of the team, and I definitely think it's the right move to make. But rather than like reiterating what Pimp has already kind of said, I hope you don't mind if I take a different angle here, and that is that this cannot be the only move that FaZe makes, in my opinion, for them to be able to catapult to where they need to be. I think that they are in desperate need of having some other type of true pure entry rifler, because the problem is that Twist has come into a situation where he is treated as more of a star compared to how he was treated on Team Liquid, as far as what type of spots he's playing, particularly on T-side defaults. But he's still not, in theory, in my mind, at least not so far, a guy that's going to be taking a lot of opening attempts. Like, he's going to be more of like your second or third type player inside of a site, kind of more of like the trade fragger, being more in the middle of the pack. And that's great. That's a great place for him to be. I don't think you should necessarily waste his aim on being an entry fragger or something like that. That's not what I'm getting at. But you need somebody to come in and be a true opening force of this team. Because here's the problem. Rain is long gone from the form that he was in a couple of years ago, where you could have considered him as one of the top entry riflers in the world alongside of Dupreeh and some of these other guys that, you know, always get touted up to be that guy. And here's the other problem. Kerrigan takes the highest opening attempts on this team than anybody else on the server. He is comparable to guys like Yakindar, Nathany, Art, some of these guys who just always are going in for the opening. Kerrigan is that guy for the team right now. The problem is his success rate is astronomically lower than every single person that I just named. And while that is okay because of the value that he brings as the in-game leader and the space that he can create for the team, for the rest of the players to come in and follow up, you can kind of somewhat forgive that his success rate isn't nearly as high as some of these other players I've mentioned, particularly a guy like Yakindar who has astronomical success rates. But you then need someone to come in second. Like, if you're going to treat Kerrigan like the sacrificial entry fragger, like an NSL type character of the past, then you need that follow-up guy. And if it's not going to be Twist, it can't be Rain. It can't be Rain in his current form. It has to be somebody else. So while I'm totally down for Xyp9x coming in for Olof, I think that's going to be a fantastic move for the long term of FaZe. I think there's one more move that has to be made. I really feel like they need like a strong like secondary entry fragger to come into this team and help out.
All right, being as I know Pimp has to go in a minute, I'll make my thoughts brief. We'll just wrap it on this. We'll just make it the Astralis complexity episode, I guess. It's fine. We had some good angles. Right, I'll say this. First of all, I'll mildly disagree in the sense that, as I've revealed on some talk shows, one of the reasons, this is the real reason people don't understand the Essetag move to Cloud9. It's because basically it was supposed to be Xyp9x. It was supposed to be Xyp9x that went to Cloud9 in that last spot, which would have been a big name signing, so it's everything you want if you're Cloud9. And then obviously, yeah, you're gonna have to pay him like fucking mega bucks because he's just coming from the number one team in the world, at least a reasonable time previously, to a team that at the time was nothing. You know, you're building a new project. So I feel like what Essetag benefited from was like, oh, actually, Xyp9x decided to stay with Astralis. Oh, Essetag, you can have the same sort of offer. Okay, bring him in. And remember, they were also buying the same Kool-Aid those fans were. Like, oh, well, Essetag really is the new Xyp9x anyway. It's like, well, that's why you don't read Reddit when you do $1 million moves, by the way. Maybe, bring in people who know the game. So I would just say, and it's not that Henry doesn't. I think he just got in love with the romanticism of, oh, he's reinvented himself and Astralis is going to be it for me. And so my problem with this move is this. It was implied to me that, like, as crazy as Essetag's deal was, Xyp9x wanted even more. Like, I'm not joking. I heard a number for what salary he wanted that was like 3 times like a FaZe player or something. Because his logic was like, which, by the way, I'm speculating on this part, but that implies to me his logic is, I'm not really coming to your project. I'm coming if you just pay me the most money in the world. Like, so that implies to me, because remember, this is one thing people will forget about competition. It's not that you're a loser if you don't want to win, but not everyone's going to make, like, and think of this conversation here, not everyone's making the move that on paper is the one that wins you the title next. People are making moves to go and play with this guy, or because I want to stay in this country, or because at this point in my career I want to rebuild. So I don't blame Zipnix in that sense. He's also played a long time, the whole of CSGO. He's even the end of 1.6. He's also, by the way, played semi-shitty roles his whole career. He's done all the bitch work, obviously. He's done an amazing job at it. So I wouldn't necessarily blame him if you want to cash out. You've already won everything, basically. You've even fucking won MVPs from that role, for God's sake. Like, there's not really much more you can accomplish. And quite frankly, you don't actually have the same agency the others do, I'm afraid. Like, Device can go somewhere, they can just build a whole team around him. Glaive can go somewhere, they can build a whole team around him. If you're Zipnix, you need to join as the last piece to a good team, and then they could be the best. Like, it's not really in your hands. So I can understand if you say, well, listen, the one thing I can guarantee is pay me my money. Give me this money now. So I hope he's motivated if he is. Because I'll say this, the guy I imagine looking at this move going, this is all I wanted, boys. Everyone just get the fuck out of my way next year. It's Carrigan, obviously. He's like, right, give me Zipnix back. Because the one thing people don't know, this is why actually, I'm going to make the analogy with Rain in a second in a similar sense. As well as fans and all the analysts loving Zipnix, he's someone that the other pro players have mad respect for as well. Because here's the thing, they all think he's the unfair player. They think every other team, right, well, we had a superstar player, and we had a fucking sick Orper, and we had a good entry guy, but nobody had a support player like Zipnix. So you'd have to go like to old school NBK or something to find someone. There was never anyone truly like that, because obviously his skills were overqualified to be that kind of like play all the shit roles player. So I know that actually people like FaZe Carrigan thought to themselves, well, this is the one unfair part, isn't it? I've got like Washed Olofmeister as my support player, and then you've got Zipnix. So I tell you what, there's a lot of players and teams out there would love to have this guy, whether he's in good form or not, because they're just thinking of the glory days. They think, give me a chance to have that. That's why on the Rain angle, dusT, I sort of agree with you. I do think as well, because here's the thing, while I think actually with Rain, he's the ultimate example of what you call like a player's player. It's just other players love this guy. They think, oh, he's so good and he was so undervalued in his prime. Probably true. Yeah. I would agree with you though. I think the last couple of years, it's like he's all right, but he sort of lives off that rep. Like people just say that in the same way as like until like recently when Electronic got good again. People kept saying for the last year he was a top 5 player. They were like, he's still a top 5 player. It's like, motherfucker, he ain't. Listen, I'd like to ask Simple about whether he thinks that or not. Like some of these tournaments he's turning in. So if you're the guys from FaZe, on the surface it's a great move. I don't think Olof could really do that role anyway. I think he himself just did like, I think when he did this role at their peak, it was more the fact that like they didn't need like tactical elements as much, you know. It's like he just had to like sort of be smart from that. I never really thought he was that attuned to it. It's a very hard role to swap to be fair. I agree. There better be another move coming. Obviously, the one on paper that everyone's been hyped about, it would happen if both parties want it, is the ROPS move. I'm not quite sure how the roles work out, but it's a straight fighter player.
You have to engage Twist more early round. I feel like
probably
picking up ROPS and Zipix, yeah.
Yeah. Or you have to make it like you say, Carrigan has to stay as like the hardcore MSL style. I'm literally the bait. And at that point in time, maybe ROPS is the follow-up or something. Who knows? He's a good enough player, you could do it. So I think it's an interesting move because obviously everyone's hyped about FaZe anyway. It's got a nice little roster. They're also one of the teams where, I'll add this final thing in as well. Unlike some of the other teams in the game where these might be the one moves they make, with FaZe, there's always still the potential to get another player. There's also still potential to change someone else out. Like, in theory, if you're right close to the top, they're one of the few teams, like a G2, that might actually spend the money to get you over the top and get you to the end of the game, as it were. So, I'm certainly interested in it as a move, though I'm waiting to see if Zipnix is the old Zipnix, though. Because I also think he never was quite the same player when he came back. I can understand why, though. I'll say this. One thing that fans mad underrate, even though if they think logically about themselves, think when you yourself as a pleb stop playing and then you come back. You're never as good initially. It doesn't matter. You can try, all the angles the same. Your body doesn't do what your brain tells you to do. If people don't know, I remember you can go look at something on YouTube. Go look up like Reggie Miller, Michael Jordan, like Street Game or something. Because basically, when Michael Jordan was retired and he was doing Space Jam, while he was doing the movie, he knew he was going to come back to the NBA, right, and do like a comeback. So he already had them set up like a facility so he could pick up basketball with all the other NBA pros while he was like filming the movie, right? And even he says in this clip, dude, this is like peak physical era of Michael Jordan. He says, oh, I can already like see areas and like I can see the angles I could go into, but my body can't respond and actually like let me go into that area and like hit the shot. Like, dude, if Michael Jordan has to say that, like, what do you think like players in Counter-Strike are going to do? Like, you know in theory what you're going to do. And remember, he had one of the hardest roles. Like, you have to be a genius to play the way he does. You have to be a robot. That's why we call him like that. So I think of all the moves, this is one of the more questionable ones, because I do agree you probably need another piece to go to the top. But I still think it makes sense for both parties with where they're at. Like these, like I said, those FaZe players will fucking appreciate him as a player. Some of them probably wanted him in the past, and I imagine he will appreciate FaZe Clan's Scrooge McDuck type vault and all those fucking crazy sponsors. This video was kindly supported by Eddie, Kris with a K, Lager15, Shenlong, Wisetown, Zachary Carter, Zack Schmidt, Adam Ochs, Alexander Rao, Animosity, Kris, Dean Tanglis, Doomseer, ErikHillestad, Hades, Jdubs, Jensen Goh, John Shelton, Joseph Ginsburg, Kovacevicd, Tobias Bernasconi, Zoomba, Zyrathenia, Bot Pounder 420, and a special thanks, as always, goes out to Jerky's Minion. Would you like to suggest a topic or guests to come on my shows? Do you want to ask me a question in one of those video AMAs where I might even insult you in a funny or maybe obnoxious manner? Do you want teasers for my upcoming content, things I'm thinking of, what I might be changing? Do you want to take part in one of those long discussions where we go all over the place with the big donators? Well, if so, put your money where your mouth is using the Patreon link in the description box below to join the Screwluminati today.